The pass from Havili was magic. The shift on for Crotty. Boom, far down you go, Quackett Smith. Me, oh my, I have enjoyed that. Yes, boy.
Sit back, relax, put your belt on, enjoy.
Draft Rugby, the game they play online in heaven.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Draft Rugby Show, episode 26, where we discuss fantasy rugby, the game they play online in heaven. And despite me saying that, we're not going to be talking about fantasy rugby at all today. We're going to be talking about the Rugby Champs, and we're going to be reviewing the 4 teams. I've got special guest, new father, Mitch Rev. Are you still new? Are you still a new father?
I don't know when that stops. I think we may as well count it as new father, given it's first time potting in quite a while as a dad. But yeah, it's weird being back on the mic. I don't really have the time to do it. So all my pods recently have been 8 in the morning or during a lunch break. So it's nice to have the chance to talk footy.
Yeah, this way we are recording this in the morning, mate. You're sitting at work. I saw you giving the nod to a few of the other teachers walking past at the time. So excellent commitment. You've got your outfit is just prime time, teacher.
Red's jersey over the top, just in case.
Beautiful. I've gone the Kurtley Beale Australian jersey. I've gone the inspired jersey because I'm assuming that he's going to be picked at 15 next game against South Africa. So I feel like that was the most appropriate one to pick.
They're very fitting. Certain journalists who should never be named seem to be backing that he'll be back in there pretty soon. So, I mean, at the moment, I wouldn't mind that.
I saw that, mate. Consistent. Yeah. You had your little. I mean, you don't really have outbursts, but I saw you on Twitter pretty active, saying that you weren't happy with a few of the stories out there. Anything in particular that was grinding your gears?
The problem is it wasn't even particular. There was probably 3 different journalists, and people can probably guess who they are anyway. But just absolute shit. Like some of them are just some nice stories about the players getting debuts. That's always nice to get that sort of backstory. But then just stuff about like, oh, these players need to come into camp, or Rennie needs to do X, Y, Z before he's got this win rate, and just linking a lot of stats that don't have a lot of relevance. So I think people, for the most part, have been pretty clever about what they've been sharing and retweeting, which is nice.
I did. I obviously, like yourself, we're enthusiastic about listening to as many rugby podcasts as we can. I was listening to the Super Rugby podcast, and they said that the Australian. I know you're a big fan of them. They're the Aussie Rugby Board are apparently looking for any reason to get rid of Rennie. I'm like, where have they gotten this from?
Yeah.
Like, they've been so supportive all the way through.
Oh no, but between that and then the Jamie Pendarem, I will shout that out for being absolute, just out of nowhere, like saying, oh yeah, this is the time for the blood. It's like, no Aussie fan is thinking that. No Aussie fan is thinking, oh yeah, this is time to bounce. They're recognising New Zealand's not at their strengths, but it's also 20 years of misery. Like, we're not sort of forgetting that overnight. Mate.
We've got to go win at Eden Park. Like,
and got to go 2 from 2. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not a chance.
Yeah, just stirring the pot. Thanks. Panram's going to be like, have his freaking quote up on the wall in the All Blacks change rooms. Maybe he's secretly a Kiwi. That could be why.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, I'm 1/8. I might dust off the lineage and the grandparent ancestry eligibility if it comes to it, just because. Yeah, I think the Kiwis will be eating that up like a hot brekkie we've just had.
Absolutely. Mate, we said we wanted to get on because you and I are just craving doing a pod, but we want to talk about where the 4 Rugby Championship sides are in their development. Obviously, World Cup next year, but there's been so much going on in the 4 sides that there's so much to talk about. Let's kick it off with Argentina. Obviously, they just had a record-breaking win, 41-26 over Australia, being coached by... They were checked. The Wallabies were checked by Argentina. Being coached by former Wallaby coach Checker. He mentioned that after the game, he broke into tears because he was so emotionally torn about getting such a good win for Argentina, but also having the demise of the Wallabies at his own hands. So where do you see them at the moment, and how are they tracking?
Yeah, Argentina are interesting, just in the sense that I think they have secretly quite a old and established team. And a lot of people probably don't look at them and think that this is a seasoned team, but you look at some of the players they're using. They've got a lot of players that are sort of in that 50 plus test cap range. Really experienced hookers, really experienced locks, really experienced outside backs, even with the likes of Buffelli, Maroney, and Orlando. They've played a lot of caps, especially together. So they've got quite a nice mix when everyone's healthy and sort of, I guess, gelling. the interesting thing for them has always been what they do with the halves, because I think I've always loved Thomas Kobeshi. I think he's awesome, but I think Gonzalo Bertrand has shown that he's an absolute firework. He's looking really good at the moment. And then Nico Sanchez was, for the longest time, just kicked over points, bit of a metronomic player, nothing too flashy other than the slight run here or there. But they're really relying on Santiago Carreras now, and so it's a really interesting option, given he's been outside back considered for the first bit of his career, and now he's coming in and I think finally starting to gel as a fly half. He's probably just not had that consistency of the players around him to really cement himself as the first choice, but he's starting to look pretty good. So the Argentine team, I'm really, concerned about. I didn't think we'd lose them. I'm really upset we lost by as much as we did. Previously our biggest loss to them was 4 points in the Rugby Championship. So they've named their team for the New Zealand, tour, and the 32-man squad for that. And there's very few changes. So I think it's a sign of a team that's building quite nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're definitely probably more settled than any other side, other than maybe South Africa. But Australia and New Zealand certainly more settled than both those sides. The Nico Sanchez, I think he's injured, right? It's just they're trying to obviously establish Carreras as the backup. But I find so interesting with that they're not using any of their gun young tens, or even what is it, Udapia? Is it
Udapia is still in the squad. I think he's 36, so he's
is he that old now?
Yeah. He's I guess our sort of Cooper equivalent, except he's even older. But yeah, he's I think just there as a fail-safe, really reliable player. But I think if they're back in the youth, Carreras and Albanos are two pretty decent options, and I think both still probably 24 and under. So hopefully they're relying on them.
Yeah, well, obviously they've picked him over Miotti as well, which is probably the other one that surprised me. But Carreras, I was so impressed by the way they played on the weekend. It was, number one, we'll get to check his influence on the team, but since when are they a kicking team? I just don't understand how he coached the Wallabies for as many years as he did, and we never once saw that tactic. But at the same time, Carreras is known as a running outside back that's moved to 10 and is trying to establish himself in that position. But he kicked really well. I thought he controlled the game fantastically, and it was probably the first time that he convinced me that he could play 10, because he showed that he has that ability to control the game. I guess in the ways of a more traditional 10. And if you think of Nico Sanchez comparatively, he is such a good controlled playmaker, will draw a couple of cheeky penalties with some soccer style falls, but other than that, just I guess will help facilitate them dominating with their pack. So if they are able to keep their dominance up in their forward pack, and I must say, despite being down a few props, their scrum looks particularly good at the moment. And then they have a running 10 that has the ability to kick on the back foot if he needs to. They can be a real weapon. I actually think there's some real upside for them.
Yeah, I think the scary thing about the 48 to 17 point win is that they're probably not the finished product yet. That isn't them really gelling completely. That's just, them capitalizing on a lot of our mistakes. I think they've got time. Once they get their backline completely in order, they could really fire. And I know we've been sort of talking about the combinations, how, sort of settled they are. But one of the things that they do still have a bit of an issue with is just getting the outside back combinations, correct. They haven't had, in 5 tests this year, they've only had 2 games with the same set of outside backs. They're constantly sort of changing between who's on that right wing. Cordero, Delgi, and Buffelli's played there. They've used Buffelli on the left wing and at fullback, so they're not entirely settled on, where they pick and stick all their players, which is a really Australian problem at the moment. So I think if they can just get a decent stretch of New Zealand where they just get the same backline playing, big shoes to fill with De La Fuente out, and I guess it makes one wing selection a bit easier with no Juan Imhoff. I don't think he's going either. So hopefully they can sort of work out the best mix there. But they're going to take massive confidence from that. A 31-point win against any Tier 1 teams, great. But that's the sort of score you expect to get maybe against an Italy or Japan to really build confidence. To get against Australia, coming into 2 tests against New Zealand, which is a different kettle of fish, but they can look back at the 2020 victory over them and probably come in with quite a lot of confidence.
Yeah, look, it's my first thought after that game was they just beat us by 31 points, and the All Blacks' biggest ever loss in the professional era is 21 points. So they've actually paced us by significantly more than the All Blacks have lost to anyone ever. So it really was a very, very big win, and it was really quite frustrating, upsetting, I think, as a Wallabies fan. But the one thing I did take away from it were, as you said, I might be paraphrasing here and bastardizing what you said, but I actually don't think that they were nearly as good as what the scoreline suggested. I actually think that they were good. They put a very good, accurate kicking game. They chased very well. Their forwards were physical, but the Wallabies back three were absolutely atrocious. I can't remember a back three of any side ever being that bad. And what do they concede? 4 tries or 5 tries because of kicks directly?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It wasn't as if they were smart, well-placed kicks. There was one nice grubber at the end that, I think all hope. Yeah, and that's how they should be exploiting teams with kicks, because they do have a nice kicking game. They've got quick wingers and they've got, smart, experienced test footballers. But yeah, some of the drops we had, I think Patai had 4 handling errors just by himself. Tom Wright wasn't assured under the high ball. James O'Connor, again, he should be the kind of player that, has been in 65 tests. He's played in a multitude of positions. He knows how to cover the field, and he's a smart rugby player. But just, yeah, it's a real concern that they could, I guess, demonstrate how easy it is to unpack us, especially when we've got games up against South Africa. But focusing on Argentina, they just executed a game really well. They made really minimal mistakes, made really clutch tackles, I think, on the try line, because we came close to a fair few tries that, they were able to snuff out, partially our errors, but also that they applied a lot of their own pressure. So, yeah, they've got a lot of confidence coming into this. And I think when you look at the players that they're adding into the squad, Guido Petty's coming back into the mix. He's, I think, finished last year with the most line-out steals in the Rugby Championship. They got Mako Vivas and Santiago Socino coming back in for front row position, so they might be able to cover probably off the bench, just with some of the players they're missing. So they've got a nice chance to, ruffle the feathers of the Kiwis, especially given a lot of their experiences in spots where New Zealand don't have experience.
Yeah, look, I think you kind of touched on it perfectly. I was just about to ask you about your thoughts on the tight 5 and the set piece. I mentioned before, I think that their scrum is coming on in leaps and bounds, since Czech is obviously he's very big on, what is the traditional strengths of the country and how do we lean into that, and I guess try and use that to push the passion of the side. So they are looking a lot better with, albeit, probably their third choice props against the Wallabies, which was massively surprising to me. When you think we've got Slipper and Tupou, I know we had a third string, fourth string hooker on there, but I would have thought we would have been dominant in that area. So that was really disappointing to see. And obviously, I don't think we were overly dominant against England either. So we've got some real work to do in our scrum at the moment, something that I thought was a huge strength. But the RG's very competitive there. And then when you mentioned Guido Petty, I think he is. Last year, I was thinking he was arguably the best lock in the world. He is. Yeah. In phenomenal form coming, when he does come back from injury. I think he'll add a lot to them. So I think they've really got their set piece in a good place at the moment. They probably need to take one more step in their front row, in their scrum dominance, just to be really happy with traditionally where they see themselves as, one of the best sides in the world. But they're going so well. And then you move down to the back row, and I think the player that stood out to me the most was Juan Martin Gonzalez, that played in the first game. He's only 21 years old. Apparently, he debuted in 2020. I didn't realise. But this is the first time I've really stood up and taken notice of him. I thought he was phenomenal. I can't believe that they didn't pick him for the second game.
Yeah, I was looking at him. When did he play? He got that awesome runaway try, didn't he? I think he was the number 6.
Yeah, that's right. So Pablo gave it to him to run away and score.
Yeah, he's a real freak. And I think there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter about how just well-rounded the Argentinian back row is. And it's probably a fair point. You've got someone in Prema who can play lock, but is just a big body, awesome in the lineouts, can shift people. It borderline penalty magnet, but, does a lot of the hard work and the nitty-gritty in the rucks. But then you've got Matera, who's an absolute freak. He can play loose or tight. He's sort of like a Pete Samo on steroids. He's got that ability to cover a lot of positions, but is just an absolute freak when he's in contact. But I still think back to that try he set up for the Crusaders in the final, putting the grubber through, a back row that can do that sort of stuff. Pretty impressive. So, yeah, the Argentinians I think they've got a really good team and a really good coach for next year's World Cup. So they're building quite nicely. how they go beyond that, trying to get the depth for the younger players in. Like, we've only listed probably 3 players between Gonzalez, Carreras, and Thomas Gallo, the loose head prop. They're probably the only 3 young guys that are actually getting a big mention at the moment. They will need to try and develop some depth, and maybe they try to do that in some of the later games in the end of the year tour.
Yeah, I think we compare it to where the Wallabies are, and the Wallabies seem to have this ability to have players in their mid-30s or in their early 20s, and there's nothing in between. So I would hope that Argentina have planned that a little bit better than what we have, and that maybe their next group coming through are going to still be quite experienced. But obviously, when you have a look at the crux of the team being built off the Jaguares from in Super Rugby, and obviously they're still playing in their South American competition, they aren't getting a lot of game time with any other side at the moment. So they're obviously going to have to be picked from that wider squad to come through, which does concern me. So I think this World Cup coming up is the one where they've really got to target a really good result, because it's going to be challenging for them to sustain it, I think, in the longer term. The one other one I just wanted to mention before we move on was De La Fuente. He is such a weapon. I actually rate him so highly as a centre, and it was just the only reason I wanted to mention him because I heard a few people slagging him off and saying that he wasn't that good. He's an established centre for so many years now. I think he is very, very good. He's just your gel. He plays like the Lucanio the Lenny Ikitau role in their team, where he just has the ability to make good decisions at all times, doesn't get caught out of position much, has the ability to set up and make the players look good around him. Just a phenomenal talent.
Yeah, he's interesting too, because I'd like to think the hamstring injury to score a try becomes a new thing. People start faking the little jog on the spot. That seemed to work quite well. I thought it was
a
genuine concern.
I genuinely thought it was a goosey.
And it looked like one. And I think it was one of the replays where Nick White actually looked a little concerned for him and maybe pulled out of making the tackle, because he's like, oh, yeah, poor guy, he'll go down. He's just hamstring. And he just sort of powered through from 10 out. So, I think if teams can start practicing that at training, the fake injury, maybe a fake trip or something like that. We'll see a lot of teams exploit.
And how do you see Checker's influence as a coach and what we know about him from coaching Australia, and how that matches with the Argentinian style of rugby as well?
Well, it's funny because the first game I thought, oh, cool, he's taken the run it at all costs approach and carried it straight through to Argentina because, as you said, they kicked 15 times. They were really intent on just keeping ball in hand. And they've got some pretty big players, but they're not like a South Africa or France. They're not that size. They are stoppable. So that game plan didn't really work. And then when we saw their sort of kicking game come in, it actually showed a nice bit of evolution. I think they realized, look, we've got the ability to get some of the outside backs involved. I think having sort of Felipe Contaponi in the mix, I think he was one of the assistants and probably touted as the next head coach. Yeah, but they've also got a few fly halves and playmakers in that sort of fold. I think that sort of hints towards the fact that, like, no, look, we've got the players to probably execute a kicking game. Let's try and get a bit more of that going. We got, Buffelli's a tall player. We've got speedy wingers that can get under the ball like a Cordero or Imhoff. So it seems as if they're really trying to marry the two themes of let's run it, let's try and get our ball moving. We're not going to do big clearance kicks all the time, but we will try and sink in some attacking kicks. We've got the players to do a little grubber or do a little midfield bomb, even if it's not seemingly the right option. And it happened to work out against Australia, so I'm keen to see if they back it up against New Zealand.
Yeah, look, I think that out of the other two sides, the game against New Zealand is probably a better matchup for them. I think, at their strength, they're probably going to play in a similar way to South Africa. And I think that'll be a tough matchup when they just basically have to come over the top of the South African pack if they're going to get dominance. They might have a little bit more flair in how they play through the back line, but I think that's a really tough matchup for them. Whereas New Zealand, depends what New Zealand you get, and going to play a 2-match tour in New Zealand is tough for any country, despite what Penderam might say. So I do think it's a good chance for them to see if they can back up their win against Australia. My gut feeling is they're going to find it tough. I think that this last week was probably the exception, not the rule, to how they were going to play. And like I said, I think we made them look really, really good. And maybe they're still trying to work out how they plan to check. And as you mentioned, his selections as well, I still don't think that he really knows what his best side is. And the fact that he's shuffling his hands so much with very experienced players is why I think that, it's not like he's trying to blood a whole lot of young guys in with some of these changes. You're picking him off, like the guys, you know exactly what you're going to get from him. He's a very good, experienced winger. They're just trying to work out if they're up to it and who's in the best side. So I think they've still got some sorting out to do to work out exactly what their 23 looks like for the World Cup, but definitely a move in the right direction. And I'm hopeful for Argentina that Czech has continued to grow since leaving Australia. You know, he was obviously very emotional, and I think just doubled down on his idea of run everything and just try and bash people, whereas maybe there's a bit more nuance. And I agree. I think Contemponi could be a massive, massive influence for them and trying to have a bit more of a tactical kicking game and controlling the game with a bit more of a plan B. So I'm very excited to see where they go. But let's push on. Let's push on to the team that we should know hopefully better than any other. That is the Wallabies in Australia, obviously. What are your first thoughts about where Australia are at?
I think it's just a case of too many players used, too much shuffling, like 42 players in, 5 tests. It's pretty crazy how many have had to come in and get changed. And, you know, we've had 7 debuts already this year. It's a lot of blooding when we've already done, I think 20 players previously under Rennie. So it's a lot of shuffling pieces. I think we've got a lot of talent at the moment, but one of our biggest issues is just we've had no opportunity to see what our best team actually looks like. I don't think we've had a single test where we've had what anyone would consider our best 23 available. Maybe arguably one of the tests against South Africa last year. We were looking pretty close to that. But yeah, it's just becoming harder and harder to see what that team should look like, because as soon as we see a good game from, say, Neville, he gets injured and Frost gets a chance to debut. And then as soon as Frost has a few good games, Arnold comes back, and we're sort of shuffling around quite a lot to see what our best team should look like. So for me, the big thing to summarize Australia is we've had all this time to develop set combinations. And I think we've done nearly everything except our locks and outside backs. I don't think we know our best outside back combo. I don't think we know our best lock combo either. So they're probably my 2 areas for concern at the moment. But yeah, we're scrambling to sort of fill in all the injuries, and we're doing reasonably well. But that last result is so embarrassing that there really needs to be a massive statement in a fortnight's time.
Yeah, I think you're right with the just the absolute massive injury toll. It's out of control. Obviously, anyone that listens to this probably looks on social media, and the team's been posted up everywhere about injured 23 or injured 15. There's just so many top line Aussie players that have been injured now. It's hard to see how we can kind of get any kind of consistency with that. You know, there's been 3 concussions, I think, in the last couple of weeks, midweek. So it's going to be really interesting to see if we can get our 7 or 8 players back this week against South Africa, how much of a change that makes. My only worry is that the players we're getting back are in the forward pack, where we're probably not being as outdone, not in the backs. The only backs that we got coming back are Paisami and Kellaway, who sure enough will give us a bit of depth and solidify our combinations a little bit more. But it's still asked the question, we're still going to be asking ourselves the question. Kurtley Beale is maybe one choice coming back for fullback, but he was originally targeting the New Zealand games. Then you've got Andrew Kellaway coming back from injury, who, of course, we all rate as this really controlled, composed player at international level, but he still hasn't been playing consistently at fullback. So when we've got holes over how we're kind of communicating and covering the backfield, it's a real worry to see that we don't actually have any specialist fullbacks in the squad, barring Campbell, who's not getting a look in, to actually try and cover that back 3. And all I can see them doing at the moment is putting Kellaway to 15 and putting Tom Wright or Patire at 14. But I just don't think that's going to fix our problem there at the moment. I don't really know what those... If I was the outside backs, put it this way, all I'd be doing in training at the moment is taking high balls and working out a communication and where we need to be defensively so that the field is covered. Like, how from a set piece, Argentina kick a 50-22 and we don't look like chasing it down is absolutely beyond me. Like, what the hell are they covering?
Yeah, and this is a big issue. And something I think, we were even talking about last year is that there needs to be that consistency in these players playing 15 for their club team or playing a lot of minutes there at test level just so they can get used to it. When we look through the club options, Banks, I don't know why he chose to sign overseas at this time. Like, I get that there's a financial incentive, but he's got to know that he's not one of the 3 players getting picked.
Yeah.
And so, that's just a complete waste. That happens. We're either fighting tooth and nail to keep him till 2023 and then, he can go overseas after. Or we're like, okay, well, let's get Tom Wright or someone else at fullback just so we can develop that, because that's clearly an area of weakness. Wright's played no Super Rugby at fullback, really other than maybe a few minutes when there's been injuries, but that's a massive issue. Then Kellaway, who's our next best option, is getting looked over Hodge, who was playing fullback over him at club level, which again is another issue. And then I look to the
Kellaway was playing centre for the bulk of the year.
Yeah, that's it just makes no sense how we're choosing to run these options. Patai's getting looked as a fullback, plays, I think, 3 games at fullback for the Reds, maybe, and then shuffled around. And then on that Australian tour, there's only 4 players that were healthy that didn't get looked at, and 2 of them are outside backs. Like, why would take Vunivalu and Campbell over if they're not going to get any minutes or any, time to develop their as potential right wing or fullback options? So
it does beg the question: what actually had to happen for Campbell to get game time? Like, in what situation were they considering using him?
And again, one of my big concerns was Paisami got injured, so Fekete starts. I'm happy with that. And we go back to a 5-3 split. Why are we putting Simone and Hodge on the bench who can both cover centre? Neither real wingers. Hodge clearly isn't looked at as our first choice outside back or fullback option. So why are we not putting either Vunivalu or Campbell on there just to get a taste and see, okay, these guys can come on and deliver. Let's run with them in future tests. To me, that made no sense. So we've got a real problem there. I think Kellaway to fullback and Wright to wings maybe the safest bet, because they seem like the ones that could stay there for the long term if they say injury free, and at their best they look quite good. But we don't have a settled option. It is a real concern. My only hope is that Paisami coming back means O'Connor and Paisami can play together, and they've got at least that little bit of familiarity from the Reds setup. And even then, Paisami plays 13 a lot of the time. To me, we really just need to nail down combinations in Super Rugby should match up with combinations in Test Rugby. And it's arguments that I've seen people already have with Game Line Analytics over the weekend, because I was saying how the New Zealand team won with 8 Crusaders players out there and a lot of Tasman Marcos. And people would argue, well, we had 7 Brumbies out there, but they weren't set combinations, or they weren't in those set positions. So maybe the introduction of Paisami and getting Pataya on the bench for impact might have some benefit, because at the moment the outside backs really aren't clicking. It's probably my biggest concern is just how many points they leaked against a team that didn't create enough pressure to leak that many points.
Well, we've talked about outside back, but you dropped in James O'Connor there as well. The scary thing for me is that we have 3, when fit, fly halves that we have no idea how good they each are in a settled side. Like, we seem to be dropping each one in for 1 or 2 games, taking them out again, and then you don't see them for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And because of that, everyone's saying, Quade's definitely the top choice. I don't know that he definitely is. Even the first half that he played, they all say, we've won 6 or 7 in a row with Quade at fly half. The bloke got injured early in the game, 42 minutes or whatever it was, and we were down when he left the field, and then we came back and won with Hodge there. How we're attributing that to Quade Cooper's influence, I don't understand. The bloke played well, made a good line break, made a good kick-in play, also threw away 2 stupid passes to give away possession, once on their line when we should have scored a try, but he threw a dumb offload to Slipper, and another one right at the start of the game to put us under pressure to start the match. I don't think yet that he has the actual settled play to consistently play as the fly half that we want him to be. I'm not saying that he's not the 10, but he definitely hasn't shown me that he's so far ahead and shoulders above everybody else. Noah Lalesio, we know, is a developing 10, and James O'Connor hasn't really had much of an opportunity other than whatever that dog's breakfast was on the weekend, which, to be honest, I don't really think he had much control over. I think it was just the back 3 being completely lost. So either way, I don't think we're learning anything. I feel like we're 12 months further down the line from where we were last year, and all we know is that Quade Cooper's around still. That's it. That's all we've learned.
To me, that's my biggest concern is we needed to have had some clear direction about what we were going to do with fly half, because we gave it to Lalesio during the French series last year, and that, he got a win. I thought, okay, we'll give him some confidence. And I thought, Cooper's coming back, that's great. He did a good job against South Africa and Argentina, but we didn't give Lalesio any time to develop with him or off the bench. So in all those wins, he wasn't featured on the bench once. We had Hodge or O'Connor. Lalesio didn't come back into the picture until the England game at the end of last year, in which he got a few minutes off the bench only because of other injuries. So it was just, I think we've done a really poor job of actually establishing what the plan is with Alaalatoa. Because he could be our starting fly half because he seems to be the only one that's, not injury prone at the moment. So, to me, that's a big issue. I think getting the 10 sorted and their 12 combo when Kravi's not there is going to be massive because Kravi's, he's proven he's the best. He's our best option, but he's also not going to be available every single game. We're already seeing flaws in the picking 3 overseas picks because Arnold's not going to be here for all of the Rugby Championship. In Argentina, some of their players aren't coming across because they've got to go back to European duties. It's a real issue that these overseas picks, they're not guaranteed to play every match. So, I would like to see just consistency. If we're backing O'Connor, awesome, let's just keep playing him. If we're backing Alaalatoa, let's also keep playing him. But at the moment, I think the longest stretch of tests in a row is maybe 5 from Cooper. And otherwise, we're just chopping and changing. And that's not good enough for, the key position where, we should be building our team from.
Yeah, look, I'm 100% with you. I think the fact that they won't continually pick Alessio says that they're not convinced he's there yet and they want to develop him. But when the other top choice at the moment is James O'Connor, who also isn't settled, I think you do need to pick and stick. And then, if there's an injury, albeit Alessio comes in and steers the ship for the rest of the season. But I think they've just got to pick and stick Jock and then play from there. So hopefully we see him for the rest of the rugby champs, just starting every single week for me. Alessio maybe to get a few minutes off the bench, as you said, but the way we use that bench at the moment, I'd be surprised if we actually did give him that opportunity there. You talked about the international players. Rory Arnold, not only will he not go on the Northern Hemisphere tour, but as you kind of touched on, he's not going to be available to play in New Zealand because his new Japanese club wants him back. I'm sorry, but they signed him knowing that he's playing for Australia. Why are we now saying that we need to release him in an international window to keep them happy? It's just ridiculous to me. He's actually just turning down the Wallabies now and taking the money. I don't get it.
I don't get why we're being nice either. It's always just like, it's that good faith so that, they keep sending players over. But we've got every right to keep him. So why are we placating the nonsense that they need to see what he's like? Like, they paid all the money because they know he's a world-class player. We know he's a world-class player, which is why we picked him in the squad. It's just a mess. And as people are rightly pointing out, he was not overly good on the weekend. It was fine. He did his job in the lineouts and scrums fine enough, but he didn't look like $1 million player out there. We could have easily have had Matt Phillip or, Nick Frost out there performing that role. The challenge now is he's only got 2 more games before he's gone again. Are we getting that investment? We needed him to be there for the full 6 matches of the Rugby Championship with the 2 weeks beforehand, with the weeks in between, so he can get used to the systems. Because otherwise, he's not really having the desired effect. He's a freak for Toulouse because he has 30 games a season with them. To me, the whole selection of players has been so messy. I think the handling of it last year with the end of year tour when everyone just started pulling out, Sean McMahon left, Quade Cooper left, it was just a mess. I thought 2022 they'll fix it. They've got the clear rule, and they're just proving no, it's still messy. So, look, it pisses me off. I'd rather we just pick the players that are domestically playing, and they just play to form. And if we happen to get them and they're in freakish form, like a Karevi, then they just slot right back in.
I think the relationship they're talking about saving, going back to your first point, is not between Australian rugby and a Japanese club. It's between the Japanese club and the player who they are employing, that they're trying to stay on the good side. But why are we letting them sign players when the precedent is being set that despite them being available for the Wallabies in the international windows, we're only going to take them for 3 games?
Yeah.
It actually sets the worst precedent because it undermines the international eligibility the window where you have to be able to give up your players. Like, if people start doing that, then we may as well throw that rule out the window. It makes absolutely no difference. As I said, to come back to it, Rory Arnold signed this contract with that Japanese club knowing that he should be available for the Wallabies for all of the international window. So then why are we pandering to this idea that he's not actually needing to be available for all of them? It makes no sense. And I dare say that Rory Arnold has 2 games to play his heart out. Otherwise, I don't think he'll play at the World Cup. As you said, we have enough other locks that we can pick someone else. Skelton will get an opportunity at the back end of the year. Isaac Rodder still to come back into the side. Darcy Swain is playing the house down. Matt Phillip is a very solid option in Australia. I actually think if we only allowed 3 players on the Giddo law, which I believe will stay, I don't think they'll change it. I reckon he's got 2 games to give himself a shot at the World Cup. Otherwise, he's done for. And I think it's his own doing.
Yeah. And that's probably the big issue for me is that we've got still not a settled side completely. We've tested all these options. Rennie's used 63 players since he's taken over, and 25 of them have played 5 or less games. There's a lot that have just sort of been makeshift players or just filled in for games here or there. We're still developing, which is all well and good. Like a player like Fiketti, he might get more caps and become an established centre, which is awesome. But we've just had to chop and change so much and so frequently that there's just been no, ability to build what should be a really settled sort of 30-man squad. And the Giddo law and the 3-man overseas law just isn't helping at the moment because we're not getting these players for long enough to actually see if they're, in contention. Like 3 tests for Skelton off the bench last week where we took Phillip and Swain to Europe and they played nothing. Was that useful? Did that benefit at all? Like there's some real issues with that. So I want them to iron that out.
On that point, who's your international picks for the Northern Hemisphere tour? Let's call that now, because obviously Quaid unavailable, Karevi unavailable, Arnold unavailable, who are our original 3, along with Korombetti, who is also unavailable, I believe, as well.
Yeah, it's tough. So we want some European-based players, and for me, I probably wouldn't be going for all 3. The ones I'd be looking at is Brendon Pangaremosa. He's someone that I think could be a decent option just because I've never, well, no, I shouldn't say never. I'm not currently a fan of Lockie Lonergan. I don't think he's, a test match ready hooker just yet. He did an okay job for someone that hadn't started a test match before. But for me, I think he's just got to keep developing in Super Rugby. He's still quite young. He doesn't have the big body. He is quick. But that's not really what you need in Test Rugby for a hooker. So I want Brendon Pangaremosa to come back as that 3rd hooker. I thought he had some good form under Rennie. Outside of that, some of the options you could look at is maybe like a Richie Arnold if we were facing another lock shortage. Or if Hooper's still not right to play, you might consider a Liam Gill or Colby Fainga, someone that's, an out-and-out 7 that's plenty experienced. But I don't think we'll be racing to fill those positions. I think... we should be trusting domestically and not thinking we need to use all 3, just because we can, but only doing it if we don't have the options locally that can fill that void.
Yeah, I'm with you. I actually don't think they'll fill all of them. I think Skelton's the one that they will pick. But BPA, my worry for that is the only reason I'd be picking him is to see if he could be a potential late inclusion in the World Cup squad if there's an injury. Like, I agree with you. I think he needs to be above Lockie Lonergan, and therefore he needs to understand the system for the World Cup next year. But I'd still be picking Parecki and Fenga, who are in Australia, over him, in which case he's your 3rd choice hooker, and we're bringing him into a squad. And potentially if we're giving him game time, then that means it's disrupting the development of the other guys. So really, I only want him around the squad so he understands what we're doing. So if we get to an injury crisis at a World Cup, we're not picking Lonnie Lonergan as our starting hooker in a World Cup semi-final when he's, 22 years of age or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I don't mind it there, but I really probably don't even want to see him get any game time other than maybe off the bench if we do. Will Skelton, I mentioned, I think deserves a bit of a run, but only if we're serious about picking him as that big body player that he is. And it's quite clear that he needs to spend time in the system consistently if he's going to be good. We can't be picking him for 3 games and then dropping him back out and expecting him to do this phenomenal role that he's done with some of these club sides, same as Rory Arnold. And Richie Arnold, I don't know, he's not even a Wallaby, is he? Like, do we really need to bring in another locking option to see what they can do? I just think it's going to create more problems than it fixes. So I'm with you. I think Will Skelton for sure, which you didn't say, but I'm going to say, yep. And also I'm going to go with BPA as a 3rd option. Yeah. But on that note, let's push. Let's talk about South Africa briefly. I think they're probably the most settled squad and a bit easier to talk about. Yeah,
South Africa at the moment seem really quite settled on their 23. They don't make a heap of changes other than that second test against Wales, which was always just prescribed because they wanted to make sure that they could see how the other 20 players in their squad went. To me, their only issues at the moment are finalising a backup in the halves. Pollard's the general, but Elton Yanchis was shocking that first test. They don't have another fly half sort of in the squad ready to play, unless they, want to shift Willemse or LaRue, who really don't play a lot of minutes there. And then scrum half, they've had injuries to De Klerk and Reinach, and they just need to try and sort out who's going to be that backup. I think Jaden Hendricks has done an awesome job so far. He's got a really solid kicking game. Just how they sort of balance that out, because Herschel Yancey's form's sort of gone out the window after a really awesome 2019. And their issue, I guess, for the tours against Australia, which is somewhat beneficial for us, is their right wing. Like, every option they've put there has just become injured. So between Colby and Kosi, Creel and Arenza, they've all been either injured or suspended. So what they do there to try and fill that void is really interesting. We saw Lukanya Am do a great job there, but I think a lot of the talk at the moment is potentially shifting Mapimpi so that they can bring in a genuine left winger as well, like a Fassi, or they could even look to someone like Hendricks or Sinatla who play wing locally. But then Kayla Moody's someone that's been called into the squad as a genuine right wing. Hasn't been in the squad before, hasn't been capped before. Could be an option between him or Warwick Gallant to fill in on the right wing. So that could be beneficial to us, that they don't have, their first four options in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only worry is that Jesse Creel's only a concussion, right? So he should be back pretty quickly. I don't know how long since he's actually had a concussion. I don't remember hearing anything about a previous history of it. So that means he could turn it around in 6 or 7 days pretty easily. So I think he should be, I would expect a decent chance to play against the Wallabies. But look, for me, I think they've got an established way of how they're playing now ever since Erasmus took over. And I don't think anything's changing with that game plan. I think they've got a forward pack that just breathes depth at the moment, and they have this ability to kind of drop players in to play the exact same role. I thought that they obviously have a very simplistic game plan, which serves them very well for bringing new players in. And Aranze, is it? Aranze, the right winger? Is that how you say his name?
I've been guessing.
Just butchering it there, sorry. But look, I thought he was phenomenal coming in on a right wing as a player that really is, relatively speaking, a rookie. He looked like an established player, So I think the big thing for me is they keep things simple, and it makes it so easy for their players to stick to their systems. Their defensive pattern looks so good because they're just told, just go with Lukanya Am as a winger. Just whatever he does, just press forward if he presses forward, and don't if he doesn't. And he just makes the right decision every single time because he's the world's best player. Just sliding that in there. Look, I think that's a really strong point for them. But for me, it's just the plan B. Everyone talks about the fact that they don't actually blast any team off the park. And I think that's a real issue for them, because even when they're dominant, that one or two bounces of the ball go the wrong way and they lose the game. So, they were incredibly dominant against New Zealand, the most I've ever seen them against really one of the top sides in the world, and they won by 16 points. On another day, New Zealand still could have etched out a win there, despite the fact that they were just not in the game to start with. And I think we saw that in the next test following up. South Africa 10% off the pace and they got knocked off. So for me, they need to find a way to score more points than what they are. Their rolling maul, I would think, should be a way that they can score try after try after try, but it's not quite there consistently yet. And they need to work out how to actually leverage the attack that they have in their backline, because there are so many good players. I'll be surprised. I hear what you're saying about the left wing option and using that instead, because you've got someone like Farsi in reserves. But it would really surprise me to see Mapimpi on the right wing. I don't think his game suits that role really at all. He's obviously a good chaser of the high ball, but other than that, I don't think he serves the same kind of role as what those other wingers did on that right wing. So I think that would be a real issue for them if they did, and probably expose a bit of a hole there. The big worry for me is I just think that their game suited perfectly to Australia's weaknesses at the moment, with their ability to bash forward through the ruck, put up a dead accurate up and under for our back three, and then they scrum the house down and they scrum for penalties. So that'll be the real litmus test for our scrum. And geez, it's been a while since we've been seeing our scrum going back on skates, but I'm a bit worried. Yeah,
I think that's going to be a massive concern. It does, even harbour even more fear that, that team on the weekend, they could still add Bongi Manambi, they could still add Archie Snyman to that tight five. Like Vermeulen's only just coming back to fitness. Peter Septor-Toy's only just coming back to fitness. Then they're two world-class players, and we still haven't really seen much of Evan Roos. We still haven't seen much of Elric Lowe. Like they've got a lot of players that can, really beef up that tight five and add a lot of flair when needed. So, for me, they're a scary team to come up against. I think you're right. They don't score a lot of points and they don't put teams away as they should. And it's crazy that the two margins between the Springboks win and New Zealand win were pretty similar margins of victory. But the first game, Springboks were so dominant and, won by a similar margin to a New Zealand team that was a little bit better than South Africa. So it is crazy to see what they could do if they're both really just going hammer and tongs.
Yeah, and I think that New Zealand played it a lot better with Richie Moe to try and get around that that all-encompassing kind of rush defense out wide to try and get the ball across. There was a couple little highlights of Richie Moe's little chip kick across field, David Avili doing the same. Like, you can put the ball in behind them, and I don't think they have a really good tactic to defend that very well. So it's obviously a high risk, but when you think about, you're probably comparing that as an option to the up and under. I actually think it's a really, really good play in that kind of middle portion of the field. So I think teams will start doing that more and more against them because it's just the only way you can break that defense down. And then, unless you got Artie Sevilla on the wing, then it doesn't matter how you get in the ball. That's the only other trump card that New Zealand have. But yeah, look, very, very good side. I think probably and I know that South Africans won't want to hear this, but I think probably a bit overrated at the moment. They're just so good at what they do, but I'm not sure that they're probably positioned well in the world rankings, to be honest, for a team that is the World Cup champs. I think it's about where they are. They're a really good side, but they just need another string to their bow and a way to put more points on teams to really capitalize and make themselves a genuine top team in the world, or the genuine top team in the world. And New Zealand, mate, as we round it out, give us your thoughts, first of all, on where they're at. Who's going to coach next game? Maybe we'll start with that.
I mean, I hope Foster.
Is that as a Wallabies fan you hope Foster, or as a Kiwi fan you hope Foster?
Honestly, a little bit of both. I think I like a strong New Zealand, which is a stupid thing to say for someone that's, followed a team that's never won the Bledisloe Cup since I've been a fan. But I like a strong New Zealand. I think there's something nice about when they beat us, but they're also beating everyone else. There's something, at least, a bit of solidarity in that. But no, I like to see them actually doing a good job week in, week out. And ideally, I want to see Robertson get a crack with the job. But that's going to happen, when he's got time to prepare, time after the World Cup. If they throw him in there now, if they do him, interim and makeshift coach now, that's not really doing anything that's going to benefit, New Zealand in the long term, I don't think. So I think Foster's got his win. He's proven that he can do it. He's proven that he's got, the players there are fine. They've got full support. Like, I know Aaron Smith and Richie Mo'unga made a really big deal to make sure they posted photos with Foster after the game to show, yep, this is our coach, this is our man, this is our leader. So, yeah, I think just keep everything as is. To me, they've got to change the squad up or start using the squad more. Like, they didn't take a massive squad over there. And still, they're not using Sevu Reece, Hoskins Tutu, Patrick Tuipulotu, Stephen Perifetta, Lester Fainga'anuku, or Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. Like, players that could get minutes in pretty much every other team. And in positions where they weren't looking dominant, it's kind of interesting that they're really that unsure of what their team should look like. And I think nearly every New Zealander is calling for Colin Grace to get a spot somewhere in the squad. Every New Zealander is calling for Coles to, either pull a finger out or get out of the team because he's, probably a little bit past it. We're leaving players like Kurt Eklund and Asafo Amua just sort of playing NPC when you've got aging, once great All Blacks, but not really delivering. So to me, I think it's a little bit of trying to follow the South African recipe of let's get the old boys in and just keep them here to the World Cup just because, they've been there, done that. But New Zealand's so different to every other country. They are, regardless of world ranking, they're the most talented rugby players in the world. And I don't think it's even in question. I think the best rugby talent is in New Zealand. They just don't have the right team together at the moment. And for a lot of people, probably don't have the right coach. I think personally with the coach, get the get the right mix of players in there that suit the game plan. And they're going to be a real force to be reckoned with. I think Jason Ryan's come in. They've got such an elite pack. If they could just get some stronger props in there, they could really, terrorize teams again. So they're not far off. And that win on the weekend showed that.
I think they've definitely been damaged badly in their front row by their prop injuries. Losing Moody, Laulala and Ofatunga Fase. I think that's just three excellent and definitely their best three props by a country mile. To lose those three, they are a little bit shallow in their depth there. I think, Ethan de Groot is really making strides at the moment, but even Tyrell Lomax, despite a good performance on the weekend, I'd suggest he's not going to be a consistent top international prop for a few years yet as a young man coming through. So I think that's just really, really hurt their forward pack at the moment. And I think that that's probably responsible for some of their issues there. I agree with you. I think Asafa Aumua, more than anyone, needs to be among that side now. They're obviously not going to play both Coles and what's his name, your Crusaders hooker.
Yeah, Taylor.
Yeah, Cody Taylor as well. So if they're both not on the side, then surely Aumua needs to be in there as the next man that can be more damaging. And, I love Kurt Eklund, but I'm not sure that he has the physicality that's needed at test level, to be completely honest with you at the moment. So I would have him on the bench every day of the week. You mentioned Patrick Tuipulotu. That man was an absolute beast before he left New Zealand. Maybe it's just a case of him not being back for long enough, but I think he's exactly what they need in their second row. And while they're confused as to what to do with their six, I'm not going to say it's my favourite option, but you could put Scotty Barrett dog roll to six and Tuipulotu to lock as well. And I think that probably gives you the set piece prowess as well as the physicality in the team and the experience in the team that they probably need. So I think that will solve a lot of problems for them. But I'll throw the most controversial question on Draft Rugby chats for the last probably 3 years. What's your back row balance? What do we do with Sam Cane?
Yeah, can we bring back Lockie Bowshire? Are we?
Yeah, you've nailed it. You hit it on the head in one.
This has been such an interesting decision because they just don't have the right mix at the moment. And I think, honestly, the player they're missing the most is Ethan Blackadder, because I think he's probably got that right mix of, he's an absolute mongrel. So he does all the hard work you'd want a six to do if they chose to play him at six. He's awesome over the ball if they chose to play him at seven. But he also counters really well and I guess complements the skill sets of players like a Frizzell if they want to go really hard in that sort of physicality, or if they want to put in a Hoskins Tutu at 8, just to play a bit looser. With the current squad, I think I'd probably like to see a Frizzell, Sevilla, Tutu back row and just go really all out attack. Sevilla's still a freak over the ball, but then they've got those damaging runners. Sam Cane, to his credit, had his best game. That was his, I guess, his answer to the critics. He stepped up, he tackled, he made his runs, he happened to score a try as well. He did look a lot more involved, but still, I think they've not had the back row or backline combinations overly well set this year. And to me, Frizzell, Sevilla, Tutu, just seeing those names on paper scares the shit out of anyone, I would think. You throw in a Blackadder when he's back from injury. The fact that, Luke Jacobson and Peter Gasol-Wakula aren't even in this conversation either. It's just crazy that they've got so many back row options, and yet they seem quite reliant on, having Sam Cane there at 7, when I don't think he's probably even in the top 7 or 8 of the form back rowers.
Yeah.
At the moment, though, my biggest question mark is surely Luke Jacobson or Dalton Papali'i gets considered as a 7 while Ethan Blackadder's injured, just because I think they probably got that right mix as well of being a bit younger, which helps, but really good over the ball and also damaging in attack. So I think they probably provide a little bit more of a mix if they were to try and change it up now.
Yeah, look, I think we're probably thinking similar lines of you basically pick Ardie Sevilla first as the world-class player and probably one of the best players in the world at the moment, and then you have to pick everything else around it. Frizzell, for him to be in that starting side, he needs to be at his absolute best, because at his absolute best, he deserves to be a starting All Black, but I think we probably see that 20% of the time, and then otherwise he goes a little bit quiet. So, and coming back from injury, it's a big ask. I thought he was good on the weekend, but I feel like they've rushed him in there because they're looking for an answer, when the easier answer is, as you said, look for someone like Dalton Papali'i, who has absolutely played the house down for the Blues and captained them this year as well, to take over from Sam Cane. But they're just so steadfast in their thought that he has to be their first player, and their first player picked and their captain. And, you said it on the weekend, he had a fantastic game, but geez, he's done that on the back of probably his worst game ever.
Yeah.
And, how many make or break games can we give this bloke where he breaks and breaks and breaks and breaks before he has a good game and go, okay, all is forgiven? I'm sorry, you can't be, as the captain of the side, good in one of every 5 games and ineffective in the other 4. So, he spent a lot of time on the wing last game, and obviously that's a tactical thing that the All Blacks sometimes do with their back row. But, geez, he's not having to back row. He doesn't have to clean out, the big bodies that he would if he was in the middle of the park. So they're using him away from the big impact zone. So again, they're losing a little bit of physicality there. And the try is probably the icing on the cake that makes him look even better than he was. But really, he's just hovering on the wing, and he was in a favourable position that, you often saw Kieran Reid and Richie McCaw kind of scoop up those tries as well. So they're nice, but I don't think that they say much about the actual performance of the player. So I'm with you. I think I'm probably picking Ardie Savea first, which means then because of that, I'm picking probably Dalton Papali'i at 7, and I'd probably go, after last week, I'd give Frizzell another run at 6, but I'm not convinced that's the way to go. I'd have no problem moving Ardie over to 6 and then picking Hoskins to 2-2 as well. I think that he deserves a better chance as well. Yeah. In the backs to round us off, obviously Aaron Smith is the walk-up starter at 9. I think they're missing someone like TJ Perenara, to be honest with you. I know that he's come back from overseas and hasn't been given a real good opportunity. I think that kind of physicality and mongrel that he can bring at the back end of the game is really missing. And I like Finlay Chrissy, but I just think that that's something that's hugely missing from the side. But then let's be honest, the big question just comes back to what the hell do you do with the rest of the back line and specifically 10? Just want to quickly give us your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think it's tough because Beauden Barrett was actually one of the best players in, their losses. It's just that the team doesn't seem to have clicked around him. I would have really liked to have seen at some point just that 10-12 combination of Barrett and Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, because I think they'd actually complement each other quite well. Barrett doesn't need another playmaker because he's just a wizard. Like when he's got things clicking, he can do the kicks to himself. He can set people up outside him. He's got one of the best tactical kicking games going around when he's in form. And I think then Roger Tuivasa-Sheck is sort of the exact opposite. He's, what they've been needing is someone that can play make, but is just going to crash the ball, make strong tackles, distribute to players that, are in a better position than him. I would really like to see that. To me, probably the big issue is just that centre mix. I think Havili was a world-class fullback that they've turned into a 12, and Rieko Ioane was a world-class wing that they've turned into a 13. Their big issue, they've never really settled on what position each centre is. So Tapaia's played a bit of 12 and 13. He played a bit of wing this year for the Chiefs. Leonard Brown and Goodhue are both injured, but they can both alternate between 12 and 13. And I think their best centre combination probably does include at least one of those two, potentially even both, depending on what sort of game plan they're looking at. So they've just got a lot of issues that really can't be resolved right now because they don't have all their best players available. And then you couple that in with Will Jordan being probably the best fullback in the world playing on the wing as well. So they've got all these players that might not be in their best position. To me, I think persevere with Richie Mo'unga. I think he's a freakish talent. I think he leads the game well and he needs more time to. And I think you can always rely on Beauden Barrett to do that if needed. Like he's played 100 tests. He's done, all this before. He can play that bench role like he did for Dan Carter for so long, or he can start a game and, dominate from the get-go if needed. But he's also a bit more versatile and can add a punch at 15 off the bench, which I always quite like when they've got that combination. I don't think it worked when they were both starting together, but it's a nice injection to have someone that freakish come off. To me, though, I'd be keen to see more Leicester Fainga'anuku. I don't think we've seen the full package from Caleb Clark. I think he's been pretty good in attack, but maybe not awesome in defence. And not that Fainga'anuku would be light years better, but I think him as a bench option gives you the option to really get some extra pace and speed and size on the wing. Or if there's injuries to the centres, put him in at 13 and he's got a really nice, sort of crash ball option there as well, which worked previously when they had players like Tana and Munga, filling into that spot. So they're probably two players I'd like to see get a bit more game time. But it's the classic New Zealand problem of everyone's talented. Just what's the best combination?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And look, I think it doesn't matter who you pick at 10 out of Bodie and Richie. They're both phenomenal and they're both going to do a fantastic job. They just got to keep picking and sticking and backing the man. Look, I just think they're missing some go forward in that team, in that back row. So I think they either need to put something like Geordie Barrett to 12, and then that means that they can put Jordan to 15 and they can bring like a Sevu Reece onto the right wing who can go hunting for the ball, is so effective getting go forward and coming and playing off his wing, or just slotting Laumape in at 12 and just biting the bullet and calling him back, and he is exactly what they need to get go forward. So I think that's for me the balance that you talked about.
I like I mentioned Geordie Barrett to 12 because while the Canes tried to do it and it was sometimes successful, I think if he played 12, I'd love to see Bowden at 10 because I think you can't underestimate like how much they would have passed the ball to each other in their lifetime. Like it'd be so easy to set up those combinations. I think you'd find there'd be like nearly no drop ball. They'd know exactly where they're going to be and what to do in that option. So there is something to be said about that combination. I think Foster's made it relatively clear he sees him as a fullback and doesn't want to use him on the wing or 12, which to each his own. But yeah, it's definitely an option, and I think would be really interesting to see how they worked as a combination.
Yeah.
Because again, like New Zealand just need to settle on their combinations. The players themselves are all bar prop are pretty much world class. And so they've just got to, get those guys set in stone and, see how they can build in the 14 remaining games until the Rugby World Cup starts.
Yeah, look, my final thought probably before we wrap up is they just need to work out their attacking shape. Just still looks a little bit confused. And there's people way smarter than both of us trying to work that out at the moment. But it just comes down to the fact that they are changing their backline so much that they can't actually get themselves into a position where second, third, fourth phase in, they know where they need to be to work together. There were so many passes. It's like nothing I've ever seen from the All Blacks being thrown to nobody out on the wing at the moment. I think they just need time together and they need a settled attacking phase, maybe a little bit simplified at the moment because of the fact that it's not working and they're looking a little bit confused. And I think if they can get that right, they'll go back to the All Blacks that we know. And whoever coaches them, my only other takeaway is Ian Foster has been dragged through the mud. It's actually pretty disgraceful how the media have treated him. And as someone that doesn't necessarily think he should be the coach, I just think that it could have been done so much better. So it's really disappointing, even all the way to Mark Robinson's interview on the week after this game. Like, it just makes no sense. The bloke looked like he rolled out of bed and decided to do a press conference and just basically throw him under the bus again. So very disappointing how the New Zealand media has managed that. But Matt, I know you need to go. So let's wrap up on that note. Thanks so much for coming on. Always good talking footy and more daytime pods, I reckon.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. We've just got to make sure we get some sort of thermos so we can sneak the red wine still without it looking too conspicuous. But yeah, I really enjoyed the chat, Harry. Good to be able to come on and talk rugby. Kim and I don't get the time all that often anymore. So thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.